What's going on, guys? Wei Koh here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us. Dylan, how are you, sir? If anyone else would like to sit down, please join us. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending the symposium. So that's it, guys. It's time to cash in the 401ks. It's time to cash in your crypto, sell your art, sell your houses, sell everything and buy watches, because accordingly, watches are outperforming the Dow Jones Industrial Index, outperforming real estate, outperforming gold. What's going on? And so many millions of people are now rushing into watches because watches have now become the hottest asset category. And in fact, they're the perfect asset, right? Unlike houses or horses or mistresses or paintings or yachts, they're highly transportable and totally maintenance-free. And unlike wine or cigars or whiskey, you can consume and use them, and they hold their value. In fact, every single person on this stage and every single person out there, with your watch on your wrist right now, you're potentially making money. And that is incredible. But what's going on with this craze? And are watches truly the great asset class that we imagine? Well, let's talk to these incredible individuals who have essentially made the market that it is today. And they've all done it with class, and they've all done it with ethics. So, starting with Ray Davidoff, greatest knowledge and repository of information for Speedmaster culture. How are you, sir?
Very well. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So it's always hard to just introduce myself without introducing as well my brother, with whom who's standing
over there.
Over there.
Sasha.
With whom
So
we started about 9 years ago our little enterprise where we specialize in vintage watches, and where we're happy to share the limelight with everybody else here. We have a little shop in Geneva.
Amazing.
And we enjoy what we do.
You do it very well, sir. Eric Koo, owner of Vintage Rolex Forums, founder of Loop. This is probably the greatest mind for all things vintage Rolex. He also basically, not Tyler the creator, but he basically created the Cartier market that we're seeing now. How are you, sir?
I see my friend Auro there, so I can't really take credit for that. But my name's Eric Koo, and I really like watches.
Aurel Box, the world's greatest auctioneer and the guy that has transported vintage culture to all of us and to the whole next generation. How are you, sir?
Thank you very much. I'm very well. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I have a lot of things in common with those two gentlemen. I can't mention Box without Russo. Somewhere there is Russo here. We also have a small shop in Geneva. Like Eric, I just love watches.
Amazing. Justin Reyes, my buddy from Singapore, CEO of Watchbox, made it the greatest secondary platform in the world, and then used secondary to fuel the rise of a mini group, and now the owner of Debethune. How are you, sir?
Hello, hello. Oh, there we go. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm in great company today, and lovely to see everyone. Wei, you're a great friend, and what an emphatic introduction. Well done. I'm excited to hear and join the conversation. Thank you for having me.
A great pleasure, sir. And Silas Walton, founder of A Collected Man. Not only the greatest tastemaker in terms of editorial content, but also in identifying the truffles of the watch world as well. Still holds the record for the highest price for a Philippe Dufour Grand Sonnerie. Bravo, sir.
Thank you, Wei. Unfortunately, I have no one in the audience to refer to, but nor do I have a boutique or a store in Geneva, but I'm very happy to be here and to join you from London.
Okay, so gentlemen, the first question is, what the hell is going on? This once insular and nerdy hobby, this thing for nerds and geeks, has become totally mainstream. Every single rapper, every single athlete, every single actor wants to be a watch guy now. Everyone from moms and pops. My doctor, while he's examining my nose, wants to know about watches. What the hell is going on? What is the reason for this? And is it because watches are being perceived as assets or real box?
Thank you so much for giving me that first hot potato here. I wished I had the answer. We live, and as far as I understand economy, we live something that some scholars didn't even know could ever occur. You have massive inflation. Sorry. Yes. Okay. Didn't like that inflation comment. Are you cutting me off?
Not me.
Is that working? Okay.
Hello, hello, hello.
No. No mics are working.
And there's a pleasant beat coming from there. Okay.
We have massive inflation, you're saying?
What, you want to continue without mic?
I need a mic because I want a beatbox. There's one there.
This one works.
Let us try again. So I was just saying that I wished I would understand economy as a professor at university, but I understand they're also struggling to understand what is currently happening in a global scale. We have massive geopolitical tensions. We have a still record high inflation. At the same time, try to find skilled employees. Wages are going up. It's a very, the stock markets are unpredictable. So what will happen in the next 6 months? Seriously, I don't know. What do I guess might happen? Yes, I think I can foresee a couple of things. First of all, yes, we've seen the hype watches being really hype in the last couple of years. And I do understand and I do see that some of those are slowing down. I don't think it's fair to call it a crash. I think there's just, people start eventually reasoning that paying 15, 20 times retail, or in the case of the beautiful Nautilus we sold in New York, 125 times retail price.
Exactly, big up.
Absolutely. Now, what the market is all about is not about those 10 models by 5 distinguished brands. The market is so much broader. Vintage, what is happening to vintage? I think when I ask left and right, hey, do you have an unpolished 1463? No, I'd like to buy one. Do you have a great Keeley? No, I'd like to buy one. So there I see sustained interest. Cartier was mentioned, we see the independents. There is just not enough good material out there that I am concerned about the market softening. I'd rather see strong, healthy prices this autumn around the world in auctions.
Amazing, thank you very much. Silas, I want to ask you a question. Aurel mentioned that the hype watches have come down, but still 1463s unpolished are very hard to find. Do you distinguish two different categories of watches, the sort of hype or commoditized watches and true collectibles? And if so, what is the distinction?
So I think Aurel gave a very good analysis of the kind of the lay of the land. I agree with him in everything he said. I think there is a distinction, of course, between sort of a general category of hype watches, which is the kind of, if you were an economist who were putting together like a bucket to track some kind of index, you'd have the Royal Oak, you'd have Nautilus, you'd have the Daytona, etc. That's a sort of general phenomena that in the last 18, 24 months has significantly accelerated, and I think we talk about all the things that currently are potentially going to impact that market or are impacting that market, but most likely I think a large amount of speculation over the last 2 years, coinciding with COVID, coinciding with the rise of cryptocurrency, has probably pushed quite a few of these assets upwards, and we're seeing a correction in that market. To what degree does that cascade down to the rest of the watch market, I think is obviously debatable. I think there is impact at the periphery, obviously, when people see the loudest and perhaps, let's say, the proudest parts of the market kind of having a sudden correction. They question the impact that will have on the things that they're interested in. But broadly speaking, I think what we've observed in the last 3-4 months is, yes, there's been that very strong correction in that bit of the market where things were particularly hyped, and then where it's extremely hyped, perhaps you see the greatest correction. But more broadly, the rest of the market seems to be in a very healthy state. There was a sort of pausing for breath maybe in the summer whilst everyone went on holiday and wondered what was happening, in the rest of the world. But as recently in the last couple of weeks, you can see that there's been a return to a level of activity that is comparable, at least in the areas of the market that we're specialized in, the kind of rare and independent space, that is very similar to the pre-summer kind of pause.
Thank you very much. Silas, I want to draw a comparison between what you do and I think what Justin is doing as well, and Danny is over there as well. So I think what you're really good at is identifying the really, truly great stuff and then creating a body of knowledge around it that helps to uplift it and give it authenticity. I think Watchbox has been very special also in the secondary market in that it has also identified and even taken positions in some of the most important independent watchmakers. But the point is, if those watchmakers were not truly great, no one would buy them anyway. Justin, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Thanks, Silas. Yeah, I mean, Watchbox, since we founded the company almost 6 years ago, we've always been supporters of independent brands. We believe in the incredible talent of the modern independent watchmaker. Jorn and Debethune, which is, obviously two topical names we find in our industry recently. These are great brands that we came in with complete authenticity around the values that really speak to why these brands are successful. I would say that since we've looked at across many different independents, and let's face it, there are a lot of independent brands out there today. I think there's certain values that we see in these brands that set them apart, and especially with Jorn and Debethune, the case was very simple. These are brands which have two of the leading watchmakers of the world. I would certainly say from a quality standpoint, I think we would all acknowledge that they're probably the finest timepieces that are being made today among let's say, the top 5 independent watchmakers. I think the other thing that's interesting is, when we look at these brands, we try and identify them. We want to make sure that they're recognizable across the room, and that's what makes them great and independent. I think we see today that they are limited in supply, and to Silas and Aurel's point is, you have so much demand coming in today, and they're looking at these height watches, and they're very recognizable because they tell a story. But in the case of independents, where we've recently got more involved in, I think what we find is that there's so much demand outstripping supply that, it's a really a balanced act. And it's actually, whilst it's a blessing for many of these brands who have been starved of attention for many, many years, I think today they're faced with another problem, which is how do you satisfy this customer demand going forward? And for us, being shareholders, we're purely shareholders, and we let these brands, run their own journey. But it's also really difficult for the new entrants and the new customer to come and collect these brands because they can't get access.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. And it was interesting to see that after the crypto crash, for what I could see, Jorn prices, Debethune prices, Kari prices, Rexha prices, unaffected, right? Eric Koh, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
When I tell young people that back in the day I could walk into a Rolex boutique and say, "Can I see a Sea Dweller next to a Submariner?" They think I'm high, right? But if I look at it, maybe in the world of watches, 2.5 million luxury watches made every year, luxury watches, right? That's about the same as one car manufacturer, right? So if everyone that wants a nice car also now wants a nice watch, the delta between supply and demand is insurmountable. Can we ever put the genie back in the bottle? What's going to happen, or is it always going to be like this?
I think that the demand is always going to outstrip the supply. I can't think of an instance where any of the main brands have really sizably cut production. And every year there's just more people interested in watches. And, sometimes it's like if production grows 5-10% a year, but then demand grows 10-20% a year, effectively it seems like there's less product out there.
Thank you, sir. Now, I'm told that you're always asked this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and I'm going to start with you, Roy. What is that one thing that these guys here in the audience, and I in particular, can get into right now that is accessible in price, that is under the radar, and that will have appreciation of potential? Roy, take it away. Is it vintage Speedmaster, sir?
Yeah, so vintage Speedmaster is actually still quite affordable. The 5 to 10K range, you have a nice selection from 69 till the late 90s, which my brother and I specialize in. But the truth is, to complement what you guys said about perfect condition pieces from the past, our supply has become so much more difficult to find. 9 years ago, my brother and I, it was super easy. We'd walk into a show and we'd come home with like 15, 25, 30 Speedmasters. Today we go to a show and I found one. That's it. So the supply, those watches are no longer being produced, but the amount of collectors is increasing exponentially every year. I get requests all the time. People are like, I want a 1985, I want a 1992, I want a 1976, I want this, I want that. And then we're submerged with requests for this particular model. We can't keep up with it. At the beginning, it was so easy. And, in less than a decade, the market has dried up even worse than when when we started again, the Speedmaster became our go-to watch because everything else was overpriced already. And you answered your own question when when you asked, but I believe the Speedmaster still has some room to go, and nice ones out there, especially nice ones, is quite hard to find.
Awesome. Eric Koo, can I ask you the same question, sir? Is it CPCP Cartier or is that ship sailed?
I think that ship has sailed a little bit. But I think watches that are, I don't know, I get asked this question a lot. I don't have a crystal ball. But I think a watch that probably represents some kind of, a value proposition, I guess people like using that word, is steel bezel Rolex movement Daytonas. They made them for, 20 years or 15 years before the ceramic bezels came out. There's quite a lot of them out there. Daytonas have pretty much always been collectible, and the prices are still reasonable considering the alternatives. And I just think that right now, when they're in the $20-something thousand range, they represent somewhat of a value proposition in that Daytonas have always been desirable, and they'll continue to be so.
Very good answer, sir. Orel box. Is it a 5711?
I would recommend first, now, you don't want to hear it, if you buy a watch that you really love, do you really care if one day goes up 10% and the next day goes down 10%?
10% no.
20%?
A little bit, yes.
No, because you're not selling it because you love
I can't
it.
sell them.
Because
The
you're not a
people who make them
flipper.
will kill me.
So if you really are in the long term in love with your watches, that's already one great start. You don't check the price of your house every day. At least I don't, because I live there and I'm happy there. Now, more seriously, I think that the value proposition formula that Eric mentioned is a very good one. And I think it's not limited to one, he mentioned one example, but whether you go for a 1950s time-only Patek Philippe in unpolished condition, a Vacheron Constantin chronograph, I would also think that you can find Audemars. Well, if you want a Richard Mille, there are things that are currently undervalued. If you compare it with other things at the same price level, and you say, wait a second, this one is just an Instagram watch. That one's a real watch. And you will find that at 500, 5,000, 50,000, 500,000, and at 5 million. And it can be a 2022 watch. So I'm not limiting myself in a specific watch. There's still plenty of gems to be unearthed.
Excellent answer. And Justin, before you answer that question, I would actually say one of the first watches which I would buy right now if I got allocation would be the new Contian Perpetual 40mm DB25. That thing's insane. Just because you're the chairman of the group that happens to own the company, I'm just mentioning it.
There may be one in your bedroom tonight.
What do you think, Justin? Actually, first let me ask you this. Because Orel said, we don't check the price of our house every day, but maybe you guys should create an index, like a commodity board or whatever like that, so we can check because there's no real reference for us otherwise. What do you think? Can we do that, Watchbox?
We did it previously, and I think we had it in our app, and we actually removed it because some of the customers didn't like to lose the romance of their watch passion in collecting. But when we removed the price index, we had all these guys that said, let's put it back. So I think it's important. I think you can create a price index. I think you've got to look at the law of averages when you look at this, because many of the watch models that we talk about on the stage, many of which are the hype watches which accelerated and they've come down. I agree a lot with what Orel says. I'm not as an advanced watch collector as the gentleman on this stage, but when I've looked at the different brands, with Patek, and you look at the pricing and how they've changed over the years, the 5270P, the 5970R, and how they've grown over the last 2 years because they're core to that model portfolio of Patek. I definitely think what we're producing at Debatoon, we're very passionate about the brand. They're very limited in supply. I think, if you get the chance, definitely check out the DB27. There's some new models coming out hopefully in the future. The DB28, obviously, I love. But it's hard to pinpoint one single watch that we really like. I think the key thing when I look at, we talk about what's value and what's buying opportunity. You've seen, the key bellwether models rise very, very quickly. The Rolex ceramic Daytona, grew 30% since 2021, and it's also gone up probably about 45% since 2020, and we've seen these same Patek core models go up 15 to 20% since 2021 and about 30% since 2020. So I think the long-term trend is really intact. The vector's there. Don't be dissuaded by these up and down swings that you see today. That's just short-term volatility. I think you've got to look at the long-term trend. There are so many new customers and collectors coming into this market every day. And that's what's really exciting. I think I speak for everyone on this stage that we have a greater audience, and it's all demographics, a much younger audience as well. So the macro backdrop for what we do every day, and we come into work at 8 a.m. and leave at 10 p.m., collecting this category is such an important and fascinating space compared to other collecting verticals.
Thank you, sir. And Silas, what would yes or Alex?
May I add something? Because I know that I didn't give you an answer. Would you buy a 5711 now?
Yes.
And now I thought about it, and I want to say yes. And I tell you two things about that. First of all, I am fortunate enough to have one since 14 years, I think. And it is probably the most comfortable and versatile watch that I can think of. I still love it the way I loved it the first day. I'm told that there was some trading at $100,000, $110,000 this summer. I don't know if the dealers here confirm. And my answer is yes, I would buy one now.
Awesome. Before
Before it goes back to 150 or 180. It is the greatest. It may depend if Mr. Stern launches a 6711 that is, I don't know what, titanium and flying and green and yellow and cool, but I think it's so classic. Yes is the answer.
I love that. Thank
Second, the index. I think that's an incredibly interesting topic. The watches we discussed this at Philips at length. And the watches we sell at Philips are mostly in their condition, type, provenance, history, unique. So it's like doing a Cézanne landscape index, a Picasso portrait index. None is the same. And imagine we would do a pink on pink 1518 index. One goes for $1 million, the other one for 2, the next one for 3, and the next one for 8 or 10. Very difficult. Every hallmark, the polishing, the patina, the hard enamel. Also with independence and contemporary. I mean, how many Dufours or Vutilinens are one identical to another one? It would be difficult. But yes, we can do a 5711 double sealed index if you wish.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Silas Walton, what are your truffles that you have unearthed?
My truffles, gosh. I don't know if I have any truffles. I think that I'll give you two answers for the price of one. With Patek, modern-ish Patek, I would say the watch, the reference that always seems to be undervalued in my eyes is the 3940. An ultra slim perpetual with a micro rotor movement, like amazing case, profile on the wrist. I've always found that the market is surprisingly, how can I put this, in non-responsive to the true value proposition of that reference in all case metals and generations. And then from an indie perspective, because I suppose I have to sort of try that. Well, obviously de Bethune, but maybe neo-vintage, a little sort of early Parmigiani, I would say, gets me excited. The kind of memory times and even the tourbillons. A year and a half ago, you could buy a Toric Parmigiani tourbillon for £35,000.
Yes.
It's mad,
Yes.
with incredible finishing on the dial. So yeah, those are probably my two hot picks if I have to.
Amazing,
do it.
and I totally agree with you. The Toric Perp Cows are
Yeah.
so nice. Right, those watches are incredible. Okay, so now we're gonna, and I know it's really warm in here, so we're gonna kind of bring it to the audience questions in a little bit. But I just want to play a little game called Buy, Sell, or Hold. Right. And I'll ask all of you the same question. I'm going to start with you, Eric, Richard Mill. But I know you have already my two dream watches, which is the RM9 and the RM12, which are so dope. But buy, sell, or hold? Nice. Orel?
Same question.
Yeah.
Buy early ones.
Nice.
Hold the larger, later ones. But buy also unique pieces.
Nice. Okay, let's switch it up. Let's talk, Roy, Rainbow Daytona.
If you want, Livia can answer.
So it's a hot topic because I've never had this watch asked from me so often as this year. I've had 3 or 4 clients call me, says, I want a Rainbow Daytona, which I should be the last person in the world to ask this type of piece. But if you can get it retail, hold. And if you happen to have bought one at retail, sell.
Silas Walton and Justin. Justin first. Rainbow Daytona.
I have to say buy that piece.
Nice.
I mean, it's something we've huge fans of. We've have lots of collectors that have collected them, and
Right.
the people that own them will never sell them. So
Wow.
I think it's one of those dynamics.
Knowing very little about that market, I have to profess my ignorance and say that my answer would just be a random spin of the roulette table, but I agree with these gentlemen. It seems to be a good watch.
Fantastic. I think there have been conversations that will be $1 million watch in the not too distant future, right? So, let's now open it up to questions from the audience or from social media. Eleanor Picciotto, who's my lovely colleague there, is roaming the audience. And if you have any questions, please shout out.
Hello, hello. Ah, now it works. Because we were talking about watches as an asset class, and when it's an asset class, do you see institutional interest, like from a fund or that are approaching you saying, hey, we want to invest, dedicate, I don't know, 10 million, 20 million to invest into watches from not private collectors, but from funds that say, you know, that's interesting for our customers. Maybe we want to invest in that space. Do you see that interest?
I think all of us on this table have been approached by some organization or somebody at some time proposing this type of thing. I'd say that up to now, you know, speaking for myself, I haven't really found one that I thought, you know, their objective slash goals slash, you know, like their, you know, their reasoning or methodology really made that much sense to me. So I wouldn't poo-poo this thing completely, but, you know, I haven't really found something that I thought was like an interesting way of doing this, you know. I personally don't really know that this like commodification of these passion investments is really, you know, it's a very, it's a thing that has legs, but, you know, I just don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Eric 100%. Once or twice a year, we have, my brother and I, we have people contact us. They're like, oh, we would like to invest X amount. And then we start doing a quick research, and we realize that it's just with compromising, if you compromise quality, and you compromise ethics, and you compromise many things, yes. But since we're uncompromising on all those things, then the answer is no. So we wouldn't, it would be too complicated.
I mean, sorry, real quickly again, one thing that I would point out, though, is that you have people who, they want to make a long-term investment, right? 5, 10, 15, $20 million. We buy things, hold them, and sell them 5, 10, 15 years later. Then, you know, you have people that want to buy and sell and trade things actively, which is obviously not much different than any other dealer, really. So it just really depends on, you know, what you're looking at and, you know, what sort of the goals really are, you know. One of the things that I found really interesting is some of these funds that have existed, you know, they were buy and hold funds, but at the same time they would issue quarterly statements or reports saying that the portfolio was up XYZ%, but, you know, it was completely like BS because they never sold anything. And I don't know how you can value these things and, you know, and say this without actually selling anything. So I was very suspect of that type of a business model.
Thank you very much. Sir, do you have a fund that you want to invest some money into?
No, I don't.
Okay,
No.
okay, never mind.
Maybe it would be interesting for Justin because Watchbox holds a lot of value, right?
Hello. Okay. I think the whole spirit and rationale behind it, I think it makes a lot of sense. I started my career as a bond trader, and when you look at assets today, the characteristics of what we're talking about with watches is very reminiscent of, you know, when we talk about alternative assets, and you're dealing in the best brand equities in the world today. So if you look at the macro backdrop of Rolex, Patek, these are foundations or families that basically are not driven by the same profitability metrics that many other public companies face. So as an investment class, and you've got to a brand that doesn't have to overproduce. They're very sensitive to the customer and the supply. I think the other thing is, we've seen over the many years that what we call a bond floor is set for the pricing. Every year they raise pricing, and what that impacts is the secondary pricing. So as you improve the primary pricing, the secondary pricing trades at a premium or discount to that. So I think the characteristics of what you're talking about, investing in an asset, makes a lot of sense. But I think to what Eric was saying, I wholeheartedly agree. You've got to take a long-term view. We've been approached by people to set up vehicles, ETFs, SPACs, whatever you call it, to invest in this class. But I think the composition of what you put into these portfolios is really important, because you have the rarity, the more collectible pieces, the hallmarks. If you bought a Tiffany Blue Nautilus, or if you had a Rainbow Daytona, or if you took a selection of the top, resonance subscription pieces, you could see, putting money into the very rare part. But then you've got the more, what I would say, the more commoditizable area, which is in Rolex, where you have a cross-section of all the sports models. But if you can build a portfolio today and look back or look forward 10 years from now, I think it makes a lot of sense, but it's got to be a buy and hold strategy. And I think, today when we look at all the other verticals that people are playing around in sports memorabilia and sneakers, I think watches is one of those where you can actually store value. And knowing that the brand equities themselves, so I keep on thinking about them as almost public companies, but the brand equities of Rolex and Patek are by far the most valuable brands you'll come across today, and they're great. We're all shareholders in some shape or form in the brand by wearing the watch.
If I could just add, I agree with Justin. I do agree with Eric as well. I think that, whenever the topic of investing in watches as an asset class comes up, and the question is posed directly, I always say, well, speaking as an individual, I'm not a qualified financial professional. So I have to provide a legal disclaimer, at least orally, to discharge my liability as far as any decisions that you subsequently make on my advice, which may be profitable or otherwise. As far as them as an asset class that can be structured into some sort of investment vehicle, I think it's inevitable. I think that there are lots of reasons at times to be uncomfortable with it. And I think that there are plenty of things that are challenging to be able to kind of establish that successfully, and that model has existed, 10 years now. I think that there was a fund in Singapore. There are other things. There's fractional ownership, this, that, and the other. So it's being done and tested. I would just say that, much like any other asset class, if a fund model exists in those other asset classes, then inevitably, as the market grows, whether it's now, 5 years from now, whenever it will be, there will be an equivalent in watches. I would just say that the market hasn't matured sufficiently yet. There isn't enough information, there isn't enough data, there isn't a sufficiently liquid market, et cetera, et cetera. But that day is coming.
Oro, do you have anything you'd like to add?
So the gentleman asked about institutional investors. Now, whether it's a pension fund, a bank, I've gone through the notion many times, looking at this with friends who understand more about the legal and the regulation surrounding this. And I can tell you, for 15 to 20 million, it's not worth it. Eric mentioned quarterly valuations. You need to have second and third parties auditing it. How do you audit a watch collection? Okay. Would it be $1 billion? I think you would have a definite impact. If that came along, I would give it another look, just because of the sheer size of it. I've done it for, let's say, friends who said, look, you know more about watches. I just want to invest 10 million. What should I buy? And I tell you what happened to those two gentlemen. One doubled his money and sold the collection after 10 years and thanked me with a bottle of wine. The other one, in the meantime, fell in love with his watches and keeps on buying, and is now a total collector. So institutional, I don't see yet. On a personal level, yes, of course, we don't want to lose money. And whether it's one watch or 10 or 20 million, I think all of us here would always give our best possible advice, what is likely giving you satisfaction on the wrist and to your wallet as well.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Dylan.
So something slightly off topic. We see like Rolex, early Daytonas initially selling for $500. Today, at the time. Yeah. Today they're $9,000, $10,000 at retail. Where do you see the retail market going from here on out? Inflation, price increases every year, in some cases twice and 3 times a year, depending on the brands. Where do we see the retail market going, and where can we see like a steel Rolex going in the future?
Very good.
I was just having this discussion with friends recently, and with like a steel Daytona, which now retails in the United States at $14,000. I don't think the secondary market price is necessarily this really, at least at the levels now. I don't think it's really like this hyped up thing. I think it's that $14,000 just like artificially underpriced. I don't know, like it would seem very un-Rolex for them to just juice up the retail on that watch, but $14,000, you're getting a lot of watch for the money, and I think that's just like kind of artificially low. I don't know, for whatever reason. I think of like there's this like Ferrari quote about making one less car than the number of like how many they can sell or something like that, and I think it's like a similar thing with the Daytona. I mean, obviously the prices will continue to go up with inflation, exchange rate differences, but I think it's always going to be, kind of under what the market value is.
So it's interesting, the comment when they were $500 back in before I started, and before I think most of us started. I remember very clearly when I started in vintage, a Submariner, for example, was $1,000. $800, $1,200, big crown, $2K, $2.5. Anyways, and when you see today people walking into the shop, just like literally, I know that people retail Rolex. They complain that every day someone walks in and says, "Is this going to go up in value?" And the salesperson just puts a note not to sell to that guy. It's quite interesting when people ask, especially for the Daytona. I remember when they were retailing for, I think, $5,500 or $6,000. That's when I really started paying attention. And back then, you could sell it easily for like 12, and then the retailer would last like 15,000. And then I remember at one point the prices dropped below 10,000 again. And I was speaking, I think, with you yesterday that they hit like 50K over the summer, right before the summer hit. And I had people who were upset with me because I couldn't sell it for 50K, and I was like, "You guys are crazy. This is, for me the Daytona has always been the index. The Daytona, the Royal Oak, the Nautilus. Somehow, somewhere, I believe it's okay if it's worth double. Doesn't bother me. I understand that this has been always a sought-after piece. It's perfectly fine. But when a regular Submariner that comes out the shop for 8K, people walk out asking like 18, 20,000 just because. This was a hype, and I'm very happy that the hype has died down and the market has corrected. We mentioned before that this is not a crash because you can see some pieces have completely maintained stability. It just makes some people, they look on Chrono 24 and they just see what people are asking and they say, "Oh, this is what I want for my watch." And I was like, no. And people see the results from Aurel and they go, "This is what I want for my watch." And then I very happily send them to Aurel, and then he doesn't not happy with me for a couple of days. So I have specific stories in mind. But anyways, the point is that there is an explanation as to why people want those watches, and then there's also an explanation when Eric mentions that it is undervalued, what you get for what you receive. But basically, brands like Rolex mass produce highly and very well made movements. So it's not something you cannot get. It's something that you just have to wait. But today, people want instant gratification, and that's one of the main factors why why a 5K Rolex would sell for 50K, and why a 12K Rolex would sell for also 50K when this is not the reality of what it is, just because they're hyped.
And then that leads me on to my second part. What do you think of brands having a flexible pricing strategy. So I think we've seen it with Audemars Piguet, where they don't actually have to issue the retail price, and the retailers can actually choose the prices that they, in certain markets, they can choose the price that they want to sell at.
I followed this kind of specifically about the AP thing. I don't really know that that is the right interpretation of that. Like, I think the thing that I know is that, you know, certain countries like the United States, you have a suggested retail price, which legally, like, cannot be enforced by the retailer. And, you know, they can charge whatever price they want, but, you know, people will get kind of not that happy about it. And I think it has something to do with them pricing everything in Swiss francs, and then also like it just being variable with the exchange rate. So I didn't see it as like this, the retailer can set the price. I think it's more just it varies based on the exchange rate.
I wanted to ask you answer to the first question about where do we see retail prices going. I think there is as long as people want fine mechanical watches, now I do, but maybe not the rest of the world. But as long as there is a strong market, there will be a shortage of qualified watchmakers. And not just those who can make a watch from scratch by hand, who work for the finest independent makers, but also at Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Zenith, they all need skilled hands. There is a competition for those skilled hands, and as long as they have to compete, and eventually also compete in terms of wages, it will become more costly to make watches. There will become more complex. There are more complexities: legal, trademark protection, shipping, security is costing companies more and more, and retailers. The burden is at the end somehow passed on to the customer. The CEOs, the groups who run these companies, are not stupid. They know it's their business. And therefore, I don't think that you will see discounting Daytonas or Nautilus or Royal Oak in the future, definitely not independents. Rather the opposite, in view of all those factors I mentioned.
Any other questions? Sir.
I'd just like to say really quickly in terms of watchmakers, there's really, they're criminally underpaid. And that's why there's so few of them right now. In the United States, between the two big watchmaking schools on the East and West Coast, they graduate in an aggregate of, I think, 30-something people a year. Wow. Of those in the United States, I think maybe half go to Rolex, a quarter go to like Patek Philippe, and then the leftover ones like weren't really like the best students, so they kind of float around maybe. But there's really like a lack of watchmakers, both creative watchmakers and, you know, maintenance service watchmaking.
Yeah. So as we talk about the commodification of watches in the horological world, I'm curious what you guys all think about the similarities to the art world and how, you know, the watch world might slowly becoming that. Is it going in a completely different direction? RL, your auction house obviously does artwork as well, but we see this with cars as well, and they're sort of treated in a similar category as far as institutions go. But from a collector standpoint, we see much, at least to my knowledge, much larger art collections. We see institutions like Bank of America has a multi-billion-dollar art fund, and we do not see an index. We do not see a Picasso is going to be this value today and this value tomorrow. It's very much similar to how we operate. So I'm just curious where you guys see the similarities, and is that where it's going?
Happy to start on this one. I think it was over 20 years ago when at another auction house we were brainstorming for a marketing campaign, how to alert people from other collecting areas. And the brochure said, and there was a wrist shot of a watch, not every work of art has to hang on a wall. So first of all, to me, watches have always been art. I don't know why some people associate oil and canvas to an artist. I see art in how a Pininfarina hammered by hand an alloy body on a Ferrari. I see art in furniture and design. I see art in jewelry. I think a great Grand Cru from the Burgundy is art. So anyway, do we see the markets come together? Yes, we do. And I think the six of us here, and probably the majority in this room, are working towards that, but not for economical gain. We believe in it. We believe that it's an art form, and therefore the markets will become more and more similar. Of course, when we sold to Paul Newman in 2017 for $17 million, people said, now watches have reached art status. Fine, okay, if they say so. In the meantime, of course, there's living artists selling for $20, $30 million, or 50 or more. We're still lagging, but okay, life is hopefully still long, and we have plenty of time to make this, to fix this.
I'd just like to say that in absolute dollars and cents, you know, a really great painting is easily like $100 million right now. And, you know, the best, however you quantify it, but like the most expensive, you know, watches are kind of in that $10, $20 million range. And, you know, to build a $500 million art collection could be like 10 paintings, you know, in a guy's like living room or big chateau somewhere. And the same amount in watches is probably thousands of watches. So I think it's just, you know, it's not at that level, like, you know, in absolute dollars and cents, where it's easy to do something like that.
One thing I wanted to add, I was discussing with my brother earlier, is that all these things that Aurel mentioned, you know, cars being art, furniture being art, wines, works of art, the only one that probably every single one of us in this room has right now and can go walk around with it is a wristwatch. You cannot bring your car in here. You cannot bring your wall painting. You cannot bring your cases of wine. You cannot wear your jewelry every day. Some people can. But really, watches, it's in its own category. It is, for me, it was an expression that I used in the past. It was a carnal pleasure. The only thing that a man can really wear close to his skin, and every man can wear close to his skin. You wear a wedding ring, you can wear a necklace, but the wristwatch is the one thing you can change over every day. It's the one thing that you can, for any occasion, you like, you know, I'm sure no one here can say, today I'm going to wear my beach wedding ring, and yesterday I wore my, like, going to the mall wedding ring. No, you really have the wristwatch for every occasion. A lot of us are collectors, and this is one of the things that drives us, is the pleasure of having something different and having something that is a piece of art on the wrist. And the legacy of it is the fact that we're standing here and all these art pieces are behind showcases and on our wrists.
So I was just going to add, I like to see everything these days in pyramids. So I look at, you know, the luxury watch market and its relationship to art, let's say, as a pyramid. I think that you can absolutely argue that, you know, a patinated 3700 in fantastic condition is akin to a work of art. I think you can equally argue that a fantastically made watch that came out the factory today, but that's, you know, superlative in quality, is equally art. But I think that the bit of the market that I'm particularly, obviously, fond of and present in is the independent market. And I always look at that as the kind of the tip of the pyramid. If you're looking at watches and art and making the sort of corresponding comparisons, you know, when you look at a Daniels and you look at the sort of the amount of originality and thought that went into a grand complicated pocket watch, for example, and then the fact that, you know, the watchmaker's hand is so unbelievably clearly in every detail of the watch, including perhaps the lack of finishing on the inside. Because frankly it wasn't a priority. Or you look at, you know, a Smith today or a Dufour from 10 years ago, you know, when, you know, the Grande Petite Sonnerie, when Philippe Dufour made the very first one, which was sold at Philips not very long ago, he said that it took, I think, more than a year of his time, almost exclusively, including working through weekends and holidays, to make that watch, to design it and to make the first watch, the wristwatch. And he at one point said that his eyes were sweating, or that the sweat from his brow, from the hours and hours and hours and hours at the workbench, without the certainty that this would necessarily be a great long-term success, would get into his eyes and it would make him cry. Not necessarily from the trauma or the emotion of the moment, but from the physical exhaustion. And I think that when you can't, there's no scenario in the world, in my opinion, where you can't, you wouldn't say that that's art. That handmade thing that was birthed of the mind of one creator, that was worked upon and labored upon for thousands of hours, that has all these incredibly unique characteristics. There's nothing there that isn't art. It's art in its purest form. So even if the market today is exactly as these gentlemen say, very, very small compared to the art market itself, and the 10 pieces of art for 500 million comparison is very apt, I do think that, as we mentioned earlier with the other question, perhaps it's just a question of time and progression. And I do like the fact that people are increasingly applying some of the same thinking to watchmaking as they do to art. I think that's a healthy comparison, much more so than, say, perhaps a speculative approach. I'm all in favor of people applying corresponding fundamentals and understanding the dynamics of, equivalent parallel markets or things, and saying, okay, so this is established as this, and this is undervalued because actually this is just as well made or better, but it hasn't yet had the sort of popular attention. But if we accept this is art, then why would this not be art, kind of thing? So yeah, I definitely see that the market will increasingly be regarded as art, but it's going to be a little while still to go.
Totally agree, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, I think we're going to finish up here as it's warm. People are here also sweating from their eyes. I just want to end with a quick wrist check, and I just want to know why you wore that. So, Roy, what are you wearing and why?
So I'm double wristing today. I'm wearing my Octofinissimo Sketch because it's one of the coolest watches that I was thinnest and most fun watches that I was able to wear that I've acquired in the last couple of years. One of the people who turned me onto it was Eric, actually. And then on my other wrist is the Mickey Mouse, just because I'm a big kid, and that's what it is, and I love collecting, so there's no rhyme or reason, I just love watches.
Amazing. Eric, I love what you're wearing. Tell us why you're wearing it and what it is.
This is a previously unknown Steel 1518. No, I'm just kidding. It's a Baltic. It cost me 550 euros. I really love the design, and traveling in Europe, I just don't want my arm hacked off.
Yes, that's the problem with the index. Horolobox, what are you wearing, sir?
Today was in a funky mood. I'm wearing something that some said, oh my God, how can you? 70s style, it's a unique piece, a gift to myself for my 50th birthday with a jade dial.
Beautiful. Justin Reyes, what are you wearing, sir?
Definitely throwing down on that one. I'm wearing a DB25 Moonphase. It's one of my favorite watches. I'm meeting up with Denny tomorrow, so I thought I'd bring it with me to see him for lunch.
Sir, you never have to justify wearing a Debutune. Silas Walton, I know what you're wearing. It's so dope. Tell us what it is.
Sorry, yeah, I'm wearing my CC1 from Recepi. I've had it for now 2 and a bit years, and it's one of my favorite watches. It's one of the watches that I wear the most often. And as I'm in Geneva and talking about artisanal independent watchmaking, and I'm having dinner with him tomorrow, it felt like all those things kind of lent themselves to the decision.
Phenomenal. Guys, thank you so much. My name is Wei Koh. My mother used to be so angry because I put all my money into watches, but hey, it kind of worked out. Roy Davidoff, thank you so much. Eric Koo, thank you so much. Horolobox, thank you so much. Justin Reyes, thank you so much. Silas Walton, thank you so much. Guys, thank you.